Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about big data a little bit, get the right way here. I'm going to talk about big data and public information from a statistician's perspective. As a statistician, I didn't think I could compete with your other panel members, so I wanted to take a little bit different spin on it. And so, to me, big data is a collection of records. A collection of records can have a lot of information in them, but getting that information into public information or a statistical report is a little bit different. And I just wanted to remind you a little bit that, in our statistical reports, we're required by OMB and the principles and practices of federal statistical agencies. They have to be statistically reliable. They have to be consistent and coherent. And I wanted to use those terms in the terms of coherent. I know a lot of people who can take a model and model a county or 2 counties, but doing that across 3,000 counties that add up to 50 states that add up to the U.S. total, that's a little more challenging than a lot of people appreciate. And finally, the consistency, not only consistency as Mary mentioned over time, but consistency between reports. If we have a soybean production, there has to be some consistency with stocks and disposition at the end of the year, and all that is a challenging process. And so on big data, I think about it in a lot of different ways, and one is FSA records, and I should have put AMS records. The first thing I worked with outside of NASA's data was with AMS's records and making that information consistent. Satellite information, NASA's been utilizing that since the very beginning. I hung a picture of a cropland data layer over there, and I did that to say I asked them how much data was in the satellite information, and they told me 8 terabytes. I can't give you a feeling of what 8 terabytes is, but I can tell you it's a lot of information. That created this cropland data layer that has 9 billion pixels in it. And those 9 billion pixels represent the 300-some million acres of cropland and field crops in the United States. So we utilize big data in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. But I was going to say this, it is challenging and somewhat resource intensive. It's not free, and that was part of the discussion. There you go. The big data, and this has been said many times, so I probably won't say much more than it's not necessarily public or confidential. It's equal access principle. That's something we have to live with. How is that going to work in the private sector, as Bob mentioned? And but I want to say something positive about the big data. Creating information does have a cost, and that's part of this discussion, but we also have response rate risk. We have declining response rates across all surveys. I think agriculture is not as severely impacted as others, but over time, that response rate, maybe it could be relieved somewhat with big data purposes. And then secondly, there's some consolidation risk as there's fewer players at some segments in the market, then getting that full information is going to be challenging, and maybe big data will have a role to play in that part of it. And then finally, I was just trying to say here on this last point that you can collect a lot of price data or you can have a lot of machinery data, but equating that and turning that into a statistical process is challenging. And that kind of goes along with my last slide, which I want to drop to the bottom real quickly, and then we'll go back to the top. Metadata, when you have a big collection of records, what do those collection of records mean? And paradata, data on data. Those definitions are very challenging in the statistical process. And if someone like John Deere has started thinking about using that information for statistics at the very beginning, then it's much easier than going later to a collection of records that are not necessarily collected for statistical purposes, but are collected for program purposes or some other purposes. So where I think big data has the most to offer us is in environmental statistics. I'm not sure what those full definitions are, but I think that's where we don't have a large collection. So how do we use that to provide the environmental statistics that agriculture needs? And then a little bit on the in-season information. By that, I was trying to say, can we use the satellite data, and we are doing research on it now, for crop progress and to make that more accessible at a lower level and more timely, as Bob was saying. And then finally, the word record linkage is in there, and that's implying, can we find a way to link that big data to our survey processes, to our farm records, so we can utilize it in a statistical process very efficiently. And from there, I think I'll say thanks and